At the extreme northern edge of the Mojave Desert, at the end of a little-traveled 12-mile dirt road, lies nearly hidden an extraordinary desert oasis known as the Lytle Preserve. It is a place of great biological diversity and tranquil beauty. By the epic standards of the American West, the Lytle Preserve is small, yet a rare combination of geology, ecology, and history has graced this place with a rich diversity of plant and animal life and made it a kind of microcosm of the American West, out of all proportion to its size. Since the Ice Age, birds and animals have followed the water through here on their migrations. For at least 1,000 years, Native Americans have followed the same stream and camped here to prepare their meals in the cool of its shade. One of America's great explorers and pathfinders passed through here on one of his expeditions of discovery. A member of his party lost his life here. Later, pioneers homesteaded this place and struggled against the eternal cycles of drought and flood. 3 of the West's great physiographic provinces converge here at the preserve, so today it is a refuge for a vanishing tapestry of endangered desert wildlife. And the year-round, free-flowing water that supports it is coveted by a growing ring of thirsty cities. So the story of the Lytle Preserve is, in many ways, the story of the American West. The Lytle Preserve is a 462-acre wildlife conservation area and desert preserve situated in the extreme southwest corner of Utah. An unusual combination of geology and ecology have combined here to give the area a unique character.
It's kind of an oasis in the desert. We have the Mojave Desert flora and fauna here, but we also have permanent water on the property. And so we're able to have a riparian habitat, we're able to have an aquatic habitat, we're able to have a thorn scrub habitat, and the upland Joshua tree forest habitat. So all of these different habitats are right here close together. And so you can see the interactions that go on in all of those.
The preserve is situated on the Beaver Dam Wash, a source of year-round water in the arid Mojave Desert. It is one of the few remaining unobstructed sources of free-flowing water in the American West. The lowlands along its banks at the north end of the preserve support a riparian forest of Fremont cottonwood, velvet ash, desert willow, and black willow. Farther downstream, on the stream terraces rising above the creek, grow catclaw acacia and creosote. Overlooking the entire valley are desert uplands supporting a classic Mojave Desert environment of Joshua trees, creosote bush, cholla cactus, and datel yucca. Some water is diverted to create an irrigation pond, which is an attraction for a tremendous variety of birds not usually seen in the desert. The stream and pond are used to irrigate the cultivated south end, solely to attract and support wildlife. The presence of water here creates an oasis where the hot Mojave Desert meets the cooler Great Basin to the north and the Colorado Plateau to the east. Although predominantly Mojavean, the intersection of these 3 great physiographic provinces is another factor that gives this area its great biological diversity. A patient visitor might find a Gila monster out at the end of the day, preparing to forage for the night, or an endangered desert tortoise grazing on some of the grasses, a spiny desert lizard sunning himself on a rock, the mysterious gecko with its delicate translucent skin, or a dozen or more reptiles. The superbly adapted desert and Miriam's kangaroo rats earn their livings here and serve as food for the coyote. Evidence of beaver reestablishing their dam and pond, washed away in the last floods, is everywhere to be seen. The preserve is perhaps best known as a bird watcher's paradise. More than 184 species of birds have been observed at the Lytle. Here are just a few. Merrill Webb is a biology teacher who has become an expert on the birds of the Lytle Preserve.
This is a unique habitat. First of all, you have water in a desert, and so obviously that's going to attract birds. In addition to the riparian habitat where you've got the cottonwoods and various canopy levels, which provides habitat and feeding areas for birds, you also have the influence of the Mojave Desert, which gets up into this area in the state, but nowhere else. Maybe a little bit, to the west of us, or to the east. And so you get those birds that are associated with the Mojave Desert, like the cactus wren, white-winged dove, Bell's vireo, the vermilion flycatcher. Black phoebe gets over into St. George, the verdin. You can get those here. This is the best place to get about 13 species of birds that don't occur anywhere else in northern Utah or central Utah. So that's why it's a neat place to come.
The richness of life and the delicate beauty that abounds here are what led to the creation of the preserve, which is owned by Brigham Young University and managed by the Monty L. Bean Life Science Museum. Dr. Douglas Cox is assistant director of the Bean Museum.
Brigham Young University acquired the Lytle Ranch for the very purpose of preserving a little piece of the Mojave Desert that exists in Utah for the express purpose of education. To preserve a place where students can come, where teachers can bring their students and give them an in-the-field sort of an experience and help them to understand the interesting, intricate, and delicate kinds of relationships between plants and animals that exist in this desert ecology. That's why we're here.
One of the most elegant demonstrations of those relationships is that between the phainopepla, a regular spring and summer visitor to the Lytle, the catclaw acacia, one of the signature plants of the Mojave Desert, and the mistletoe, a parasitic plant that thrives on the catclaw. The origin of the catclaw's name is readily apparent once one meets the wicked little curved thorns that line the branches of the plant. A favorite food of the phainopepla is mistletoe berries. The birds digest only the flesh of the berries, passing the seeds which germinate beneath the bird's perching spots. The mistletoe pushes its roots directly into the branch of the catclaw, so the phainopepla spreads its own food supply as it moves from catclaw tree to tree. In winter, the clumps of the parasitic mistletoe are plainly evident in the bare catclaw trees. The catclaw is one of the first plants to lose its leaves in autumn and the last to turn green in the spring. The Lytle Preserve represents just about the northernmost range of the phainopepla and many other birds. To appreciate how the Lytle's location plays such a powerful role in shaping the area's biological diversity, it helps to understand its location in relation to the geology of the West. The Lytle exists on the drainage network of the mighty Colorado River. The Virgin River that sculpted Zion National Park is a tributary of the Colorado River, and a tributary of the Virgin is the creek in Beaver Dam Wash. It's this roughly north-south orientation of the Beaver Dam Creek here at the intersection of the Great Basin, the Mojave Desert, and the Colorado Plateau that has endowed the Lytle Preserve with so many special characteristics. It allowed the Mojave Desert to extend along the edge of the Colorado Plateau to the cooler Great Basin, forming a kind of natural highway between these three zones. Botanist and former director of the Bean Museum, Dr. Stanley Welsh.
It is a migrational route, a natural migrational route for both animals and plants. Mojavean vegetation from Southern California, Arizona, Southern Nevada, find this pathway and follow it into this corner of Utah. Nowhere else in the state of Utah do we have Mojavean vegetation. Some of it extended up the Virgin and into the St. George Basin, but a part of it, a peculiar part of it, extended in here. The catclaw, for example, that fills the mouth of Catclaw Canyon across from us, doesn't make it into the St. George Basin. And the mistletoe that grows in the catclaw doesn't make it into the St. George Basin. Occasional phenopepala, the black and white bird that feeds on the berries of the mistletoe, is a very common occurrence in Beaver Dam Wash, but not very common in the St. George region. So a whole bunch of things come this far, Mojavean plants and animals, and stop. They don't go anywhere else in the state.
The same pathway exists for birds. A corridor of the Pacific Flyway takes advantage of the same geography. That's why these red-breasted mergansers are here in the desert.
And the flyway then comes down the eastern side of the Great Basin, and the animals then follow the path of least resistance, the lowest elevation route, and they drop over the summits and through the passes in the bull valleys and the clovers, and into Beaver Dam Wash, and down the wash, and then they have a low elevation shot to the Gulf of Mexico, or that is Gulf of Lower California, Baja, or on into Mexico, wherever it is that they're heading for to spend the winter. And so we have a natural flyway.
As long as you've got water, it's going to be a pathway. Birds are probably less reliant on it than perhaps people, but they still have to have it when they're flying. And when you've got water, then you've got vegetation. When you've got vegetation, you've got food. And they have to eat on their way north. So that's why it's so important as a flyway. You know, a bird's flying over and they look down and say, oh, there's a pond up there, you know, there's greenery along here. Let's just stop off for a while and see what's here. And I think that's kind of the, if I were a bird, you know, that's what I would be looking at, for something like that, which would be a natural little mecca or oasis for me to come to.
Humans, of course, followed the same pathway up the wash the plants and animals did.
The Aboriginal people, the Paiutes and their predecessors, moved through this area because they could leave the Virgin River and within a day's walk be to the place where the water was available again to drink, and they could stop here and spend a few days and gather some kind of food and spend some time, and then leave here, and it was a day's walk from here to Mataqua, where there was more water. And by following the water, they could move from here into the southern part of the Great Basin, or up the wash they could branch and go over onto the Santa Clara, or over onto the Muddy over into Nevada. It's simply a fascination that you can go on practically any one of the points around here and find the evidence of the Indian occupation.
Many of the stones which these Native Americans used to grind their food are still to be found in the bluffs overlooking the wash. 3 of these metates and manos, as they're called today, have been left in the spots where they were found. Silent testimony to Native American occupation dating back at least 1,000 years. The exploration and settling of the West followed these same paths used by Native Americans, and so perhaps it was inevitable that a chapter of this saga unfolded in the area of the Lytle Preserve. John Charles Fremont, one of the West's early pathfinders and a controversial figure of American history, passed through the Beaver Dam Wash on the second of his 5 expeditions of discovery throughout the far West. In 1844, his party was returning east through the Mojave Desert after having completed the tortuous first winter crossing of the Sierras into California. Hostile Indians, who viewed the expedition's valuable horses and mules as food, had been dogging the expedition for days by the time the exhausted travelers camped at the junction of the Beaver Dam Wash and the Virgin River. A young Frenchman named Thibault left the camp in search of a lame mule. Kit Carson, Fremont's loyal scout and close personal friend, was reporting the young man's absence to Fremont when both men noticed a smoke rising in the distance. They knew it immediately to be a signal among the Indians, indicating a blow had been struck against the expedition and to expect retribution. A search for Thibault found only a small puddle of blood and signs of a cruel struggle. He had evidently been killed, stripped of his belongings, and thrown into the river. Though they thirsted for revenge, the men, aware of how precarious their situation was in such hostile territory, could only hurry on. The Beaver Dam Wash wasn't settled until the 1880s, when federal agents were raiding Mormon settlers in southern Utah for the practice of polygamy, then a Mormon religious belief. Hannah Levitt Terry was forced to this remote spot by these federal officers pursuing cohabs, as the wives were called. Hannah's husband, Thomas Searles Terry, was a man 5 years older than her own father, and in his mid-60s was not up to the rigors of homesteading in such rugged conditions. In 1889, Hannah was left alone at the wash to care for herself and her 6 children. When the youngest of these children was being christened, Thomas is said to have asked of Hannah, "What name do you wish to give this child?" Hannah replied, "We have been banished. We have been exiled. You will name this child either Banish or Exile." The child was indeed christened Exile and was known throughout her life as Eggsy.
Hannah lived barely over the edge of the bluff here to the south, a quarter of a mile. Also, for the same reason the Indians did here. The water was nearby, and there was shade. There was shade in the afternoon that shaded her house. And in the morning she received full sunlight, and by afternoon the cooling shade. Water was nearby. She could irrigate a little piece of property, raise some apricots and figs and pears and plums and peaches, and she raised all of those, and a cow and some alfalfa, and milked her cow and fed her 6 kids.
Hannah raised all of her children to adulthood in the cabin at the edge of the wash until 1912, when a flood swept away her farm, her orchards, and the work of 2 decades. Hannah, crippled by arthritis, moved away. This plaque was erected in commemoration of the site of her homestead. It is placed beneath the persimmon tree that is said to be one of the few remaining signs of Hannah's struggles. The area was homesteaded again by John Eardley in 1928, who ran cattle on the property until Talmadge Lytle bought the ranch in 1952.
My nearest neighbor was 14 miles away. That was clear up at Matauqua, and the other one was about 20 down at Littlefield. So you weren't bothered by your neighbors, but it was a little lonesome, but it was something about it that kept you busy and you kept your mind off from it. And, well, I'd just sit down and talk to myself or go out and listen to the coyotes howling. There were plenty of them. What you don't have, you don't miss. I didn't miss any telephones or electricity. Just got along without them. Of course, you were fighting floods, too, a few times to keep your water in. Well, there was a time when we had 3 of them down one year, and everybody said, "Oh, we'll never get another one like that first one," but we got 3 more of them. Well, it took a little of the property too, but it was worth it. I don't regret a moment of it.
Talmadge Lytle sold the property to the Nature Conservancy, who in turn sold it to Brigham Young University in 1986 to create the educational preserve it is today. Just as for the settlers and ranchers before, life still revolves around the river's cycles. The heart of the preserve, indeed the very reason for its existence, is the Beaver Dam Creek.
Water, as all of the early explorers of the American West indicated, is the lifeblood of the American West, and it is no different for the Lytle. The Lytle is here because this water is here, and this water is here because of geological structure on up the canyon a ways, where water is forced to the surface after having been under the gravels for about 7 or 8 miles. This water arises about 2 miles north of here from large springs right in the valley bottom. Those springs are the result then of the water coming down from Mataqua for about 8 miles underneath the gravel and then being forced to the surface again by the limestone. Then the water flows above ground downstream for about 4 miles and then sinks again into the sand, only to come up just north of the town of Beaver Dam in Arizona. So for most of the distance, the length of the stream is underground. And only where it arises above the surface do we get the riparian vegetation, like you can see here at the back of us. And that riparian vegetation dominated by Fremont cottonwood, by Arizona ash, by black willow, and baccharis, which is sometimes called seep willow, form this riparian type. So it's a unique habitat.
The life of this rare desert riparian forest is intertwined with the life of the water in a subtle weave of different cycles. The vegetation affects the water flow, and the water flow affects the vegetation. Water flow is usually measured in second feet, that is, how many cubic feet of water flow past a point per second. Stan Welsh.
The actual usual flow from the springs is maybe 4 or 5 second feet of water over the year. During the summertime, that will fluctuate. During the night, it'll flow that much. But during the daytime, that flow will drop. And it will drop down to maybe 2 second feet of water. The reason that it drops off during the daytime is because the trees are evaporating it. They are taking it up and evaporating it out of their leaves in a process called transpiration. But then during the night, transpiration slows down, and the stream flow will increase back up to its 4 or maybe even 5 second feet. So that's an average situation.
But of course, nature is rarely average. Few things are a better example of that than a river. This usually placid stream, like all desert waterways, is capable of astonishing fury. When the rains do come in the desert, the water runs off quickly because of the lack of vegetation to hold it back, and the hard soil is quickly saturated. In the desert, a local flood can be caused by rain falling miles away. Desert floods are among the most powerful erosive forces on Earth. In moments, tons of sediment, rocks, and boulders are transported downstream. The stream bed changes instantly. It's an awesome process, and the Lytle continues to be shaped by it. This raging river is the same gentle Beaver Dam Creek captured on video during a recent flood. These unusual spring floods represented for the Lytle Preserve the same fundamental problem faced by any preserve or national park: how much to intervene in nature to preserve nature.
Flood was an interesting problem because the flood very nearly took out our little reservoir. It did a lot of damage. We had spent some time and effort to get water pipes in to manage the watering of the agricultural areas a little more effectively, and frankly, the flood dealt us a devastating blow in that regard. But that's what nature does. And we didn't get angry and discouraged about the flood. We only got angry and discouraged about our finances and trying to do our job. And so we had to reestablish all of that, and we had to make some repairs as a result of the flood. But there are changes. There are changes in the wash. There are changes in our property. And that's okay. That's what we're here for.
Yet, as cruel as the floods were to Hannah Terry, and as depleting as they were to the University Museum's finances, floods are an integral part of the way a river operates. The riparian environment that exists along the river's banks is the product of varying cycles of drought and flood. Examples are everywhere of the variations of flow in the stream bed. These cut banks and stranded flood debris are silent testimony to the power of the stream. The place simply wouldn't look the way it does if there weren't floods.
The floods rejuvenate the riparian forest. They wet new sandbanks, and those new sandbanks are laden with seed from the cottonwood and the ash and the other trees and plants, and the plants then reoccupy the new sandbanks, which are now nutrient rich, having all of the nutrients brought downstream by the flood.
So the river, like everything in nature, exists in a life of cycles. Some are apparent within the span of a human lifetime, and some are not. The desert conveys an overwhelming impression of changeless eternity. Yet, if we could speed up time, we'd witness these majestic cliffs melt away like sandcastles at the ocean. Over the past 100,000 years, this stream has meandered back and forth in its channel, cutting deeper and deeper into its bed. The soil it digs through washed down out of the Beaver Dam Mountains 6 miles to the east. Speed up time enough, and we'd see those very mountains themselves dissolve like sugar cubes. So, although the preserve is set aside for study, it is no museum. It is, most of all, a tranquil place to witness the grand cycles of nature. Cycles of day and of night. And the mysterious cycles of the seasons, landmarks of life we don't usually have the opportunity to witness in our indoor industrial world. Spring is a delicate thing in the desert. Here you might find a single delicate cactus bloom. And just a few feet higher or lower, a cliff rose explodes with color. In summer, moisture, following the same pathway the birds follow from the Gulf of California, collides with the rising late afternoon desert heat to produce thunderstorms of awesome energy. In autumn, the riparian forest presents a display of colors not usually seen in the desert. And the mule deer come down from the mountains to take refuge from the hunting season and feed in the orchards by the light of the full moon. Winter cloaks the desert in a kind of silence, nearly lost to us forever. The low angle of the winter light changes the entire appearance of the place and makes the sky seem bigger than ever. The reptiles are hibernating and the vegetation is dormant, but the coyote, wearing his thick winter coat, keeps his solitary vigil. The river flows as always. And as it has from the beginning of time, the cycle repeats, and the cottonwoods turn green once again. Away from the gentle influence of the water and the riparian habitat it supports, the desert conditions reassert their influence. Desert plants have evolved to be very protective of their moisture. Leaves tend to be small or narrow to minimize evaporation, and nearly every plant in the desert protects itself from grazing and hence water loss by shielding itself with spikes, thorns, or needles. The uplands overlooking the entire valley are outlined by a forest of Joshua trees, the signature plant of the Mojave Desert. Beautiful or grotesque, depending on your aesthetic, the Joshua tree is the largest member of the yucca family. Early Mormon settlers to the area called it the Joshua tree because the plant seems to lift its arms in supplication, like the biblical Joshua. The Joshua tree's narrow, spiny leaves are coated with a waxy cuticle to retard evaporation and are tipped by a dangerous point to discourage grazing. As it grows, the leaves turn brown and fold down, forming a spiny sheath covering the trunk. It's difficult to date a Joshua tree because they are monocots with fibrous trunks which don't form annual growth rings the way dicot or wood trees do. Though research continues, it's thought a Joshua tree lives at least several hundred, perhaps as long as 1,000 years. This Mojave landscape cradles an animal population every bit as desert adapted as the plant life. Mammals are most widely represented in the desert by rodents, by far the most plentiful mammals on Earth. Rodents outnumber all the other orders of mammals combined. One of the defining characteristics of rodents is the one for which they're best known, their incessant gnawing. Rodents have two pairs of grooved incisor teeth, one set on top and one on the bottom, that grow constantly. They literally must keep gnawing to prevent these teeth from growing through their jaws. The desert is home to a family of rodents called pocket mice. These are rodents with fur-lined pouches on either side of their mouths, which they stuff with seeds, their main diet. They're all superbly adapted to the desert environment, never needing to drink water. They get all the water they need by reabsorbing the water produced by processing the starch from the seeds they eat. The smallest of the kangaroo rats is Miriam's kangaroo rat. Their superb jumping ability allows them to discuss territorial disputes in midair. Kangaroo rats have an oil gland on their backs to keep their fur dry should they ever get wet. Since that's rare in the desert, they keep themselves clean by rolling over on their backs and giving themselves vigorous sand baths to get rid of the excess oil. At the other end of the size scale is the largest of the pocket mice, the desert kangaroo rat, who moves by prodigious leaps of up to 6 feet. It's an excellent means of both escaping predators and traveling over hot sand. Like its smaller cousin, the desert kangaroo rat takes sand baths from time to time to keep his coat clean and dry. If you're lucky enough to get a good close look at this nocturnal animal, the desert kangaroo rat is distinguished by its large size, pale sandy color, and most of all by the white tip of its tail. No other species of pocket mouse within the Lytle has the same white tip. The Beaver Dam Wash got its name from beaver, and nowhere is the ruthless nature of cycles better demonstrated than with the ebb and flow of the beaver population. Floods washed away a well-established beaver pond and den. Yet within a year, the beaver were busy reestablishing themselves. This beaver dam and the evidence of their diligence are everywhere. They cut down trees and make a dam to create the pond they build their lodges in. Beaver dams leak water, so the stream isn't blocked completely. Instead, the dam serves to slow the water flow and spread out the stream, thereby promoting the growth of willows and other beaver food downstream. There is no better example of the rodents' gnawing imperative than around a beaver residence. Beavers don't actually eat the wood they gnaw, though they do eat the bark. The beavers' prodigious engineering energy caused several Indian tribes to believe that giant beavers built the continents. A look at the scale of their undertakings makes it an understandable belief. Hated and hunted, poisoned and trapped throughout his range, the coyote is one of the few animals whose range has continually expanded, despite all the efforts to exterminate him. Today, his range extends into areas where he never existed before, like the eastern states. Unlike the more social wolves, coyotes rarely travel in packs, preferring to operate in less conspicuous pairs. The coyote's legendary cleverness caused the Indians to know him as Trickster and believe that the coyote will be the last animal left alive on the earth. Hearing the sound of his calls in the desert night, it sounds like the coyote might believe that too. It's the sound of what writer J. Frank Dobie called authentic tidings of the invisible world. Reptiles are usually described as being cold-blooded. It's a somewhat misleading phrase because it suggests that reptiles don't need to keep their body temperature constant, as mammals do. The difference is in the way reptiles maintain their body temperature. Reptiles maintain theirs by moving in and out of the sun. It's tempting to think of this system as somehow more primitive, but the ability of reptiles to survive in the harshest conditions soon dispels that mammalian prejudice. It's just another solution to the same problem. The Lytle is home for the increasingly rare Gila monster. At 16 to 18 inches in length, it's the largest native lizard in the continental United States and is the only venomous lizard in North America. The texture of his skin explains his scientific name, Heloderma suspectum, which means warty skin. The beautiful mottled color pattern acts as effective camouflage and protects him from his enemies. He eats eggs from ground-dwelling birds' nests, desert tortoise eggs, and occasional small mammals. The food is converted into fat, which he stores in his tail to sustain him in 9-month hibernations. Indeed, he's actually able to survive for as long as 2 years on stored fat in his tail. In spite of his splendid adaptations, however, vanishing habitat is diminishing the Gila monster's numbers. These tiny, mysterious lizards are sometimes mistaken for baby Gila monsters, though the gecko is no relation. This is the western banded gecko. Their delicate, translucent skin makes them vulnerable to ultraviolet radiation and desiccation, unfortunate sensitivities in the desert, so they're mostly nocturnal. Like the Gila monster, they can survive for up to 9 months in their cool, moist hideouts by slowing their metabolic rate and burning the fat stored in their tails. A gecko's tail contains more energy per unit of weight than its body or even its eggs. Like many other lizards, the gecko sacrifices his tail to escape. When a predator grabs it, the tail breaks off, giving the gecko a chance to get away. This prehistoric-looking vision, the horned lizard, is often mistakenly called the horned toad because of its squat, toad-like body. But they are true lizards. Unlike most other lizards that rely on escape mechanisms like speed and breakaway tails, the horned lizard's slow metabolism forces him to depend on camouflage. His color and uneven outline make him blend into his desert surroundings. And if a predator does try and swallow him, his spikes make it a very unpleasant gulp. Its diet consists solely of harvester ants, whose sting is highly toxic, yet the horned lizard has evolved a number of adaptations to survive on such a diet. Nearly everything about this gentle vegetarian is slow and deliberate. With a lifespan of 75 to 100 years, the desert tortoise doesn't mate until 15 or 20 years old. His heavy shell and bony skeleton don't fully develop and harden until he's 7 years old, so he's very susceptible to predators when young. The desert tortoise eats 3 or 4% of his weight every day in the spring to rehydrate after his winter hibernation. They manage to go a very long time without any water by storing at least half a pint of water in 2 sacks under their shells for the dry spells. As a last-ditch defense effort, they can expel that water to give a potential predator a surprise soaking, but then the tortoise is on borrowed time for water. It's hard to imagine how such gentle, unprepossessing little creatures, which have endured since the time of the dinosaurs, principally by not getting in anybody's way, could now find themselves at the center of a controversy. Yet in many fast-developing parts of the American West, such as the area around the Lytle in Washington County, tortoise habitat is often prime desert development land. So its listing as an endangered species brought it into conflict with developers. Rick Friedel is a wildlife biologist with the Utah Division of Wildlife Resources.
The desert tortoise was listed in April of '89, and the provision against habitat alteration proved very difficult to enforce under the Act and led to a lot of conflicts between economic development and endangered species conservation.
Todd Eskew is an ecologist with the National Biological Survey of the Bureau of Land Management.
They occupy a large land area in one of the fastest growing parts of our nation. And so the people and tortoises come together. And when that happens, it's generally not good for desert tortoises.
In a natural state, animals with long lifespans, like the tortoise, don't usually have many predators when they're adults. But when environmental pressures begin to kill off the breeding adults, the impact on the entire population is greatly magnified.
There's always lots of losses of the small animals in a natural system. When you start losing the big animals, I mean, that's what the population depends on for perpetuating itself. And so we've changed the rules on the desert tortoise. Now we're looking at tortoises dealing with cars, which is not a natural predator.
Fortunately, development isn't a threat within the preserve itself. But the tortoise isn't the only example of economics appearing to conflict with wilderness preservation. There's a saying in the West, whiskey is for drinking and water is for fighting. And one thing the Lytle has is water.
This is the only free-flowing water in the area. It has a very small and limited flow, and yet in water-hungry West, this is looked to as a potential source for housing developments, for the construction of golf courses and condominiums, not only in Utah, but in Arizona and Nevada also. This is an upper basin state, and those are lower basin states, and in the Colorado River Compact, then there are fundamental problems of inter-basin use of water. And so this stream has never been adjudicated. It's never gone to court, so that no one understands how much water there really is, and not all of it is now being put to legitimate use, and there are numerous claims against this water. They estimate for total water flowing in the wash beyond the Arizona border is about 8,000 acre-feet a year. Applications are for 108,000 acre-feet. So the stream channel is oversubscribed by 100,000 acre-feet of water.
The traditions of water use in the West pose an ironic predicament for a nature preserve like the Lytle.
And you have to be putting it to some kind of legitimate use, like growing crops, or you have to have it in a ditch leading off from the main stream and being used for some legitimate purpose. You cannot own the water right and leave it unused. If you leave it unused, then you lose the right to use it. And so if we were to try to just leave it in the stream, we would lose our water right here. And we have an ancient water right here, dating from the 1930s, and that's ancient here on this stream. It is not ancient with regard to the state of Utah's rights to water, but it is ancient for us. And so we do have a priority water right.
So as idyllic as the Lytle Preserve is, the stream that winds through it is very much connected to the economics of the rest of the world. The lesson of the river is the same as the lesson of the desert tortoise. Everything in nature is interconnected. The condition of wildlife in one area may reflect environmental conditions much farther away. The migrating bird population that travels through the preserve is an excellent example.
There's a lot of concern about warblers and their abundance and how they're coming through and how the clearing in the tropical rainforest is affecting their abundance. And so, some of these neotropical migrants are of a concern because they're kind of a barometer for the health of the whole environment.
Of course, there's plenty of subtlety to nature's interrelationships within the boundaries of the preserve. The relation between the phainopepla and catclaw acacia, for instance, proved more subtle than previously understood.
When I used to come down here in the 70s and the early 80s, I used to see anywhere from 13 to 20, 25 phainopeplas. They were really common. In fact, this is one of the places where you just came and you expected to see them. Then in about 1990, 91, really cold temperatures, down below freezing, killed the acacias, and as a result, the mistletoe, which provides food for the phainopepla. And so when I was doing my, I don't know if we'd call it research, but I was doing a lot of transects down here for that 2-year period, I only saw phainopeplas twice. And that was pretty unusual. And this morning I saw 5. So the acacia is recovering, and so the mistletoe is recovering, and that's pretty evident with the return of the phainopeplas. They seem to be tied in pretty closely with that, both for food and for nesting.
So an important part of the field work of biology is determining what animal populations really are to sort out what might be environmental damage from previously unrecognized natural variations. Mammalogist Clyde Pritchett collects a string of harmless traps he's left to sample the pocket mice population around the Lytle. A neighborhood coyote apparently offered his help with the collection.
Right here, you can see the bait. I had my trap sitting right there, and I know it because I can see the oats that I had for the bait. And then, if you look, the trap walked to here, and to here, to here, and to here. Then it started running because they're closer together. You can follow it. Went over here, back this way, over here, out this way, back here. Really an excited trap. Ended up here. There are coyote tracks here, and a safe little Merriam's kangaroo rat. Safe and happy, and the coyote didn't get him. Cute little guy, good for you. My generation, I feel, as a generation, really didn't care much, or at least as I looked at them, didn't care much for nature. They were more concerned with putting money into their pocket than they were with what else went on around, and you can't change that attitude very quickly. And I realized if we were going to make the change, it had to be starting with the elementary teachers and the students in the elementary schools who can make the change, who can be taught and can gain an appreciation for nature and for protection of wildlife and for conserving these things that we have.
So perhaps the future of wildlife preservation lies not only in the creation of the preserve itself, but in offering young people the opportunity to experience the nature in the preserve. These high school students were fortunate in having a field trip to the Lytle organized for them. Some local school boards prohibit school buses from dirt roads, presumably because of wear and tear on the buses.
We've got to somehow figure a way to revolutionize the economy of our education system so that we can say, hey, a field trip into the desert is part of the curriculum. It's not just a field trip. It's not extracurricular. It is curricular. The classroom education, although it's good and important, to really know and really understand and really become good at biology, you need to get out in the field. You need to get into biology and experience it. You need to put on your hiking boots and your sunscreen and wear your hat and go out and be in nature.
Here, the Utah Division of Wildlife Resources conducts a desert ecology workshop for high school science teachers. It's an important way in which the lessons of the Lytle Preserve can be carried back to the classroom. But of course, not every lesson can be brought to the classroom. Some simply have to be experienced.
The first mountain lion I saw, I was excited to there it is, and it wasn't being chased with dogs. It wasn't. It was on a road, and it walked off into the brush, and I could see it in the lights as they were. It was out right at the edge of where the lights were, and I was looking at it, and it was just like a ghost. It disappeared, and I thought, gee, how neat. And I got out of the car, it was very dark, and started walking over, and then all of a sudden that ghost reappeared, and the beautiful lion, and I had a chill go down my back, and it was exciting and really touching. It just makes you feel good. Like sometimes a beautiful song, it just makes chills go up and down into your back, and that's the way they are.
Debate about wilderness preservation is increasingly framed as a choice between economic development or preserving our environment. But what's really at stake is the preservation of quality of life. What value should we place on a fleeting moment of soul-stirring communion with the unknowable? Do we really want to develop a world without the possibility of that experience?
As a boy, I never saw a bear as I was growing up. Spent a lot of times in the mountains, and I thought, gee, that would be nice to see a bear. Chief Seelith from one of the tribes up in Washington once said, what is the world going to be like when there's no more eagles to see and birds to hear in the evening and the frogs arguing around the pond? And he said it's the end of living and the beginning of survival. And I really think that's too many of us maybe could care less whether the birds are here or the animals are here. But again, my hope is that these young children that we're teaching, when they grow up and it becomes their generation, that maybe it might change, and hopefully we'll have concern about it.
We hear a lot of people talking about the future and about how they feel somewhat pessimistic about how the future is going to be when we talk about the environment, about pollution, about how mankind is destroying the environment through our development and one thing and another. I have a tendency to believe contrary to that. I'm kind of confident that this earth has an amazing ability to rejuvenate itself. I think that ability is somewhat contingent upon man and how man responds to his responsibility in nature. I think man has a stewardship responsibility, that he is, in a sense, the steward of this earth and its resources, and we have a responsibility to maintain those and to protect them.
Today, jet contrails appear in the cold winter sky over Lytle, high above, yet still retracing the same route that plants, animals, and humans have used for millennia. The passengers in these jets probably don't give much more thought to being temporary occupants of the Earth than the countless others who've passed the same way. Yet, if indeed we are stewards of the Earth, we may never know when or how we might be called to an accounting of that stewardship. So perhaps the most useful lesson taught by places like the Lytle Preserve is that the value of an experience in nature is beyond value.